Well, thank you for being here. My name is Chase Doherty, and I am the curator of contemporary art here at the Delaware Contemporary, and this is our newest episode of On Art. And we are here with Raúl Romero and Sara Dittrich in the exhibition Undercurrents, which is on until December 31st. And super excited to speak with both of you today about this exhibition. So thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, great. Okay, wonderful. So I thought it would be a really great way to just kind of get everybody a little bit more familiar with yourselves. And if you could just introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about your practice. Both of you are so multidisciplinary, but I think it would be wonderful for our guests to just kind of get maybe a brief overview of all the different mediums that you work in. So Sara, I'm going to start with you.
Sounds good. Yes, so I'm Sara Dittrich, and my practice is based in Baltimore, Maryland. And as you said, Chase, I do have a very interdisciplinary practice. These days, I'm using a lot of different materials, but it tends to be printmaking, robotics, interactive electronic technologies, and I use video, and I use those to create different kinds of installations and performances. A lot of the times they can be interactive as well.
Mm-hmm. Great, awesome. And yeah, and Raúl?
Yeah, so I live and work in Philadelphia, and my work uses sound as a medium and material, and I incorporate sculpture, installation, and performance into my work. So a lot of the things that I'm interested in kind of deal with the idea of taking sound and finding different ways to show it visually, or in ways that we can feel or sense a movement that might come from sound, and thinking about the energy that revolves around that and all of the materials and technology that are incorporated into moving that energy from a one form that's invisible to perhaps a form that we can connect with.
Mm-hmm. Well, that is a really great segue, because I wanted to talk more in depth about both of these installations that are in the gallery. So we have two different pieces for both of you, but both of you really have these kind of monumental, I think they're more monumental, they are for the gallery that they're in, but these installations, and they are both so thoughtful, and the conception of them. And I think, you know, I was able to work with both of you on what these would end up looking like, but I would love for you to just talk about the specific works in the gallery, and really kind of the inspiration that came about and how that turned into the actual installation. Just because I think a lot of our guests and visitors they just are so inspired by these kind of more immersive experiences that you're providing the museum. And we would love to hear a little bit more about how those came to be, because they are so thoughtful. Sure, and I'll start with you, Sara, again.
Yeah, so I would say a lot of my work is thinking about the rhythms of the body, and kind of more of these like internal unconscious rhythms that can be found, such as like your heartbeat, breathing, the footsteps you're taking. And so the two pieces in the gallery actually kind of came about during the pandemic, when there was like this renewed awareness of our body, and like appreciation for our body, and this awareness of our breath. And so the one piece, the tender interval, it is interactive, and it allows two visitors to sit across from each other at a table, where they can put their hand on a heartbeat sensor, and that sensor picks up their pulse, and then they watch water drip from this kind of IV looking device into a little jar. And so they're watching their pulse in real time. And the water collects in these little jars, and then I invite the viewers to take the jars with them and kind of return the water back to the earth in any way that they wish. And I think this kind of using the water is becoming more common in my practice. I think it can kind of be seen as like a theme of healing or a symbol of healing. And just kind of thinking about the idea of this interconnectivity that our bodies have with the earth, just how most of our bodies are made of water and the earth is also mostly made of water, and kind of thinking along those themes in our respiratory system and just how all those are very interconnected. And so in thinking of that, the big wall installation, Ebb and Flow, I use tubing that's woven through that pumps water at like 1 second intervals, kind of like creating this pulse throughout the piece. And then the main kind of, I guess, structure of the piece are all laser cut cyanotype prints. And cyanotype prints is a printmaking process where you essentially coat a paper with UV sensitive chemicals, and then you can stick traditionally, like you can use anything, but like plant materials on top. I use a lot of like grass and pine needles for the prints seen in this installation. And you set it out in the sun for like 10 minutes. And then after the print has exposed, you can take it back inside and rinse it out in water. And it turns this like beautiful blue color. And then I think I really got into this like cyanotype printmaking process during the pandemic because I found it was like this really kind of satisfying, like almost like sculptural process. It's a very physical process because you're like in my studio, you know, I'm like lugging, you have to like change out the water and you have to go out and find the plant material. So it just became a way to like get my body moving again in the studio and like out in the world. You know, after kind of being like kept inside a lot at the beginning of the pandemic. So that's kind of how that process started to enter my practice. And then I really enjoyed, I started to feel I guess confined by the size of paper I was able to like rinse out. So you could only like go so big. And so I started wanting to find ways that I could like expand the scale of the pieces. And I found that by laser cutting them into pieces and then collaging them together, I was able to like collage them into a larger scale piece. So that's what you see here. And I think the imagery for me, I was thinking a lot about like veins and cells, and again, kind of those more like internal imagery of the body is what I was thinking of when I like collaged the piece that you see in the gallery.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so I
thank
think that's probably a good summary.
Wonderful. Yeah, definitely. Sure. And yeah, Raúl, would you mind telling us a little bit more about the work of yours in the show?
Sure, yeah. And yeah, thank you, Chase, for inviting us to be in the show and make such a nice pairing. You know, Sara talks about the rhythm that is the underlying rhythm within the body, and it's a nice kind of pairing in the sense that for some of my work, you see literally rhythm in the form of a drum, which is, you know, the rhythm section a lot of times in music making. But, you know, when I think in your question, you were asking about the space and the sense of like the immersive art installation component. And, you know, for me, for this work, it's new work that I haven't shown before. So being invited into the space and trying to figure out how to make that work live in this space was a fun challenge to do. So also during the pandemic, you know, I had time to cultivate and grow the material that we see in the installation with the sound installation. So I grew from seed these bottle gourds, and throughout I believe 2021, you know, they formed the fruit that then eventually went through a drying process. And these gourds are basically vessels. They're traditionally used to create a Latin percussion instrument called a guiro, which is a timekeeper. It's a scraping instrument, and in the sense that it holds time, as well as the rhythm for many salsa and Latin jazz and different kinds of music. It's interesting that it also holds this other history that deals with my culture, being from Puerto Rico. And it's basically holding and containing the sounds from Puerto Rico. So there's a few things at play in this work where the vessel is a container, but then also within the installation, trying to recreate the imagery from what it would be in the wild, perhaps, where these bottle gourds grow on vines. And when I was growing them in my garden, they kind of took over and ended up like climbing up the walls and then growing across like the phone lines that were running through this empty lot in West Philly. And they, there were just like vines everywhere, and the gourds were growing and hanging off the vines. So when, this invitation comes to install in the gallery and looking at the space, there's these two columns that kind of serve as like these posts that then we can run these lines on, and then kind of maybe mimic the idea of like vines growing, but then also reinforcing the idea of energy moving through these lines, and that energy being sound energy, which is literally traveling through the speaker wire. So there's multiple layers of metaphor and reference back to sound transmission, energy, the objects themselves, and the material language behind them, and the cultural significance in which they hold for me personally, but then also creating a place to listen and contemplate the sounds from Puerto Rico, where that's on one end that's playing, and then on the other end we hear the sounds from the cicada brood that are coming from the Poconos area, which were recorded during a residency at the Pennsylvania Environmental Education Center, PEAK for short. But it's kind of taking these two very significant and kind of like sounds that define place, and then having them converge and mix within that space, which is another kind of layer within the work that's referencing migration from Puerto Rico to Pennsylvania, where there's been a lot, Philadelphia is the second largest population of Puerto Rican people in the US outside of New York City. So there's this exchange that occurs between the two places. So that's also in reference to the work. The sculpture, the drum sculpture, is another work that's in a series of mine where I'm utilizing drums as another form of a vessel to carry different forms of information that relay, again, if we keep the theme going with the rhythm, right? And thinking of the heart, thinking of how that pulse is the driving force a lot of times in music, but also as a form of communication, and then the different ways that can move not only through entertainment, but through culture and over time, how it changes. So in this case, the drum is referencing a shape of half of a sine wave. So if you think of a full sine wave, it's the series of a wave that might be elongated or scrunched closer together based on the frequency that this energy form is traveling. So in this case, it's kind of condensed to a more moderate tone, a sample of that frequency, and then cut in half to kind of create that form of movement and motion.
That's so interesting. Oh my gosh. Well, thank you both. I mean, and you kind of answered my next question, but I think that both of your answers really speak to how layered your work becomes based on your ideas and your conceptions. And I think, and I was so interested in inviting both of you because of your layered approach to your work. And I think, especially with the sound, with the interactivity, with the materials, I wonder if you could and you might not be able to do this, I'm sure you probably will, but talk a little bit about how I think you did such a great job of acknowledging all the different ways that you're accessing the senses with these works in this exhibition in particular. With your larger artistic practice, where do you kind of start, and how do you feel like you naturally, as an artist, interweave all of those different senses throughout your practice? I don't know if that is a clear enough sentence, but I think that that's what's just so fascinating to me about both of your work, is that it feels so intentioned, all of the multisensory and immersive aspects of your work. It is so intention. And I wonder if you could just speak to that a little bit. Sarah, would you like to go first again? Yeah. Whoever wants to.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think it's nice just to like kind of go off what Raúl was saying, that there is like a nice overlap between our work and how I feel like we're trying to find or like showcase these kind of invisible energies in a sculptural, physical way. But in terms of kind of how I like interweave these like different senses and materials and how it all comes together, I think it stems for me from just how my like practice has naturally grown or like evolved over time for me. I kind of started out with an interest in woodworking, and that led to creating sculptures that looked like musical instruments. And then from there, I started wanting to like create performances to use those kind of sculptural object instruments. And then that led to learning video to document those performances. And then from there, learning a little bit about robotics and electronics and seeing what the possibilities were with that. And so now it's just kind of become this very entangled kind of process. And I guess for me as well, I'm just a naturally like curious person. So I think curiosity plays a big part in my practice, traveling to like new places or residencies, just kind of seeing. I kind of don't always like go into a work with a clear plan, but it kind of naturally evolves or appears over time, I would say, based on the kind of materials or people I encounter.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, in a similar, thanks. In a similar fashion to, what Sarah's saying, I think as an artist and having different curiosities or inspirations that come through our lived experience that then inform our work. Starting off, like for me personally as a musician and then evolving into visual art and making, there's a lot of skill learning and building that occurs throughout over time in our practices. So yeah, it's just a fun studio process in a sense where it's problem solving, and it can take learning how to do something new in order to finalize a vision of how something might go. And then throughout that process, could be an evolution of what the work ends up looking like based off of that experience. So, for me, working with plant material, there's a lot of experimentation that is involved with one, learning how to, properly grow and cultivate this material so that I can harvest it, and then to keep it over time. So there's trial and error. And then there's like, now all of a sudden I'm working with a finite resource in the sense that I only have so many gourds that I was able to harvest and then process and dry. And then it's like, okay, what's the best way to like build the technology into this material so that it can function not only for the purpose of this, but then, for example, this exhibition for the duration of 6 months, right? And survive, right? So then there's this like these thoughts and basically the learning curve that is part of that studio practice to kind of learn how to operate with these different materials and make these happen. The same with the sculptures. It's like I have another version of this sculpture that's a different shape of a drum, and the way that in which I've built these has changed over time, where we adapt to different technology that might help with the part of the process. But at the end, at least for me, my hands are very much in this thing to make it exactly how it needs to be. Although maybe in the beginning I might utilize the use of a laser cutter to help with some of the internal shapes and components to make the sculpture. The outside, the final results of building the piece are still very much handmade. So it's a nice combination to kind of like learn and evolve over time how these things are made.
Well, and just seeing, I mean, I think both of these pieces too, what's so incredible to me is how this exhibition turned out. Is it feels that I know that I asked the right people to do it, because both of you are so, meticulous in the way that the installations are so beautiful, as well as so conceptually rich. And I really think that I just so appreciate that. I think all of this experimentation that you're talking about, all of these skills that you've learned in order to reach this point, has really paid off, because I think they're really, really, it's such effective work. And I think that the exhibition turned out so beautifully. So props to both of you. And congratulations.
Thank you.
It's really such good work. So my last question was, I think one of the another through line that we had with the exhibition is that both of you, among your curiosities with the actual materials and these multisensory interactive pieces, were also you both have a keen interest in aspects of nature. And that seems like such a large element of both of your practices. And I wonder if, and maybe it's not as large as I'm thinking it is, but I'm wondering if maybe you could just speak a little bit more about how nature really affects the way that you think as an artist. Raúl, do you want to go first?
I can, sure. I mean, it's I think for me, it's kind of like a reflection of my environment, or perhaps the environment I strive to be in. And that in that way that it's also reflective of my lived experience and the places that I like to visit or research. And it's almost like, in a way, just like an organic evolution of that process. So it is intentional, but then it's also in a way serendipitous, in the form that it's a reflection of, for me specifically, like reflective of where I grew up in rural Florida, or reflective of my cultural heritage and visiting my family in Puerto Rico, and having these experiences that were so close and in nature, that then continue through my adult life, where there's a gardening part of my life. There have been employment times where I've worked with plants, for a job as well, and then just the sheer awe of how, in a way, like present these plants and nature is in our life, and also kind of like acknowledging this other way of thinking about our environment, and the energy and then the capacity of how that can inform us beyond the way we might think about it, perhaps like in a more mainstream sense, where we live with plants as decorative companions or as a food source, and then there's more involvement in that, in the sense of how much plants influence our, speaking of food, like our health and nutrition, but also our mental health, and how that also affects environments when we're moving from, let's say, a rural area to an urban area, and how much of an effect plant life and matter has in our daily lives is another component of this as well.
Yeah, I would say similarly, it's for me kind of just like reacting or responding to my immediate environment. And I think for me, incorporating those kind of more like natural elements, like with the cyanotype prints and collecting the plants for that, and incorporating these aspects of water, and in some other works, filming time lapses of the landscape or the sky. That's kind of, I think originally is kind of more recently been an element in my work over the past few years, where I was at an artist residency at the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, Massachusetts, which is at the tip of Cape Cod. And my experience there is kind of what Raúl was saying, like the difference between, you start to recognize between like this rural environment versus a city environment. I was really struck there by how fast like the nature there shifted and changed. Like there, it's very windy, so like daily I would see the sand dunes change shape and the coastline change with the like high tides going in and out every day. And I realized when I'm living in, Baltimore City, you don't like see that. Like it doesn't, you're not as like, don't feel as connected to that, or you just don't like physically see those daily changes. And when I was out at that residency, I started noticing all these little things around my environment. And so since that residency, I feel like I kind of brought that back with me, and I tend to be more like tuned in to just like what's happening in the environment around me. And that's kind of how it started to filter into my artwork.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Oh, well, fantastic. So I just have one last question for you. I just always want to ask if, kind of what's coming up next for you both. Are there any opportunities that are coming up that we should be, in tune about? Also, I mean, are there any new experimentations or new work that you're excited to learn a new skill to do in order to make it happen? Yeah, either one of you.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I guess I would say I recently got back from a trip in Chile, and I brought back with me like a bunch of photo and video and footage. And I feel like like this winter, I'm going to spend a lot of time this winter just like processing that experience I had there. It was a really unique landscape. And as we've been saying, like kind of my environment or these new experiences tend to like filter into new artwork. So I'm hoping this winter to kind of like process my experience there, because I was in the Atacama Desert, which is a really like unique geological site. So I experienced like a lot of like unique landscapes that I hadn't experienced before. So I think that's what I'm gonna be focused on.
Wonderful, wonderful. And how about you, Raúl?
Yeah. So on Saturday, December 16th, I will be activating a sound sculpture installation that I have that's on view at the Fabric Workshop Museum. That's in a group show called Sonic Presence. So that's Saturday afternoon, I believe. I can't remember if it's like around 2 or 3. There'll be 2 activation performances where I will be pretty much creating some plant music, but then shifting gears a little bit and creating a human circuit where participants from the audience can connect with each other, and then we will in our connection create some sound. And I see it as a translation, but then we'll kind of like sit with that for a little bit and have that experience, and then there'll be some screen printing activities afterwards with a drawing that I've made to kind of like commemorate the activation or performance for that work.
Wonderful.
And then in Friday, March 1st, there'll be an opening at Vox Populi Gallery here in Philadelphia, where for the first time, like in a more official capacity, I'll be collaborating with my wife, Susan, who is also an artist and has a very vast horticulturist background, and has been very much an integral component of all of the behind the scenes within my art making and the sculptures. So this will be a really fun collaborative show that we're gonna put on at Vox. So that'll be in a few months. Yeah, so there'll be new work for that as well. So
Great. Oh my goodness. Well, I'm so, like I said, this was such a wonderful exhibition. It was great to work with both of you, and I'm so excited to see all of this new work and what comes out of everything. So thank you to you both.
thank you for inviting us for the exhibition. It's been a pleasure and a wonderful opportunity to show the new work and to get to know Sarah and show alongside Sarah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. It's been a really great experience.
Okay, great. Well, and for everybody who hasn't seen the exhibition yet, it is still up until December 31st, and it's wonderful. So got to make it over to the Delaware Contemporary. Thank you.